Thank you, Matt. Just to follow up on Tom's referencing of the hospitals. I mean, of Gaza's 33 hospitals before that were fully operational before, say, October 7, there are now 3 that are semi-functional and so on. It's creating a really horrific situation. Now we talk about the food and the starvation and so on, but is there any way, and I don't have any ideas, but is there any way to actually make these hospitals more functional and able to care for more people, especially children?
So the best way to achieve that goal, which is very much a goal that we have, would be to reach a deal for an immediate ceasefire that would last for at least 6 weeks, right, and would allow for a cessation in hostilities, would allow for the delivery of humanitarian assistance, would allow for people inside Gaza to move around, both doctors and patients and those who just need to seek medical care. That would be the best route to reach that objective, and it's one that we are continuing to pursue.
Mm-hmm. So, 6 weeks would probably be a nice respite for the people and for everybody involved, but it also presumes that the fighting will continue thereafter for whatever reason after the end of the 6 weeks, especially, in light of what you alluded to yesterday, that you support Israel in its pursuit of the defeat of Hamas and so on. And what we see 150 days after this war began, we see that the fighting is still going. Hamas is not defeated. By the best analysis, it has been degraded somewhat, maybe 30%, 20%, whatever it is. So conceivably, this war can go on for another year.
So we have always said that we want to see this conflict end as soon as possible. We want to get a temporary ceasefire to alleviate the humanitarian situation and get the hostages home. But it is our goal to end the conflict completely and to end it as soon as possible. And as you have heard me say before, Hamas bears a lot of responsibility for the conflict continuing to be waged. Hamas could come forward and surrender. They could come forward and swear off violence. They could put their arms down. And one of the things that we would very much try to pursue in the event of a humanitarian ceasefire would be the demilitarization of Gaza and the demilitarization of Hamas. And it's something that we will consult with, that we have been consulting and will continue to consult with partners in the region about, because for all that Israel has done in this conflict and all it has done to bring Hamas terrorists to justice, Hamas does bear a lot of responsibility for the conflict ongoing. So if we are able to get a ceasefire, it is very much something that we will pursue.
I understand, but you're saying that you want Hamas to surrender. That is, I mean, is there really serious thinking that this is actually going to happen? I mean, considering that the Palestinians have been waging some sort of, an armed struggle against Israel for the past 75 years. I mean, they go from Beirut to Lebanon to Jordan to places like this, but it goes on in the West Bank and so on. Is there really expectation that the Palestinians will give up the notion of getting their rights or getting their rights in the absence of the world doing anything about granting them their rights, that they have to do it on their own?
So we do not want the Palestinians to give up their rights. In fact, you have seen the Secretary and the President pushing very hard for a two-state solution that would create an independent Palestinian state and would answer the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people. But to this question about Hamas, when you've seen 30,000 Palestinians killed, why wouldn't they lay down their arms and stop that bloodshed? Why wouldn't they lay down their arms and stop the war? If they truly care about the thousands and thousands of civilians who have been killed in a war that Hamas started. So remember who started this war. If that was in their real interest, the well-being of the Palestinian people, I'm hard-pressed to answer why they wouldn't lay down their arms and pursue a demilitarization option when you have the United States and other countries in the region saying, we are prepared to step forward and work on a legitimate political path forward for the Palestinian people. Not one that's brought about by terrorism, not one that's brought about by violence, but a legitimate political path that leads to an independent Palestinian state.
Lastly, I'm sorry, but just to push this point a bit further, the Palestinians basically said, okay, we lay down our arms. They've done it time and time again. They recognized Israel. They signed treaties and so on with them. Hamas said they will abide by the, let's not,
Hamas won't even sign up to the principles of the PLO. So.
But I'm saying that what we're saying, there has been a Palestinian effort that has failed. I mean, people look, whether it's Hamas or somebody else, they look at 30 years of effort to arrive at the resolution that the United States has signed to, and in fact sponsored in 1993. No? And it has gone nowhere. We see the settlements expand. We see the occupation become more violent against the Palestinians. People are more imprisoned and so on.
So if people continue to look at the past and only the past that has happened for decades and decades without being willing to sign on to a positive vision of the future, we will never have a peaceful way out of this conflict. Not just the current conflict in Gaza, but an actual resolution to the long-standing conflict between Israel and Palestinians.
Well, the problem with that, Matt, is that you have called for in every single conflict around the world there to be accountability for things that have happened in the past. And now you're saying, oh, well, just forget about it.
No, that's not. My point is there has to be at some point a political reconciliation. And so I think Saeed's point was, why would Hamas agree to lay down arms when we have seen grievance after grievance go on for decades? And the point that we have made, and you've heard this, the Secretary speak to this a number of times.
Fair enough,
ultimately, there are two paths. You can continue down this path where we talk about what happened decades and decades ago and try to address that through violent activities, or we can have a peaceful resolution to this. And of course, of course, there's a process for addressing legitimate grievances through that process. But what I'm saying, and the point that we have made, is continuing to carry out violence as the solution to decades-old grievances is a path to continued conflict and a never-ending cycle that does not advance the interests of the Palestinians.
But you're talking about addressing legitimate grievances from the past, right?
Yes, and my point is through violence will just lead you in this never-ending cycle that the region has been in for decades.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I mean, because you said that why wouldn't Hamas look at the numbers of dead, 30,000, and effectively surrender? But that almost suggests or implies that the numbers killed creates a political or military pressure on Hamas to do so. But you've always said that, you know, any civilian death is unacceptable.
That's not my implication. That's not my implication at all. Any civilian death is unacceptable.
But you connected those two issues. No, but a Hamas surrender, you know, looking at the number of deaths, why would they not?
It is not the implication. I don't think that's a fair reading of what I'm saying. Every civilian death is unacceptable. The point is that Hamas surrendering would end the conflict and would end the civilian casualties that have unfortunately happened since October 7th. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Jen.
So I just want to clarify, the Israeli government has told you that if Sinwar was to purely surrender, that would be sufficient to end the war.
So I'm not going to get into the conversations that we've had, but obviously if Hamas surrendered and laid down its arms, that would be an end to the conflict.
Including Sinwar.
He is the leader of
so
Hamas in
It's
Gaza.
sufficient for them.
So I'm not going to speak on behalf of the Israeli government, but obviously when you have one side of a conflict stop fighting and lay down its arms, that brings about an end to the conflict.